There are moments in life when silence speaks louder than any confession. In this imagined story, Dylan Wang noticed the silence long before he understood it. Don't forget to subscribe for more insider stories, trending moments, and viral breakdowns. It wasn't sudden. It didn't arrive like a storm. It came quietly, slipping into the spaces where laughter used to live. Messages that once arrived instantly now came hours later. Conversations that once flowed easily now ended politely. Shen Yue still smiled when they met, still greeted him warmly, still laughed at the right moments, but something essential was missing. Her eyes no longer waited for his. For years, fans believed their connection was unbreakable. They saw it in the way Dylan leaned closer when Shen Yue spoke. They heard it in the softness of his voice when he said her name. They felt it in the pauses between words, the kind of pauses that only exist when two people are deeply comfortable with each other. But comfort can turn into uncertainty when feelings are left undefined. Dylan had never been good at pretending. He was expressive, impulsive, and emotional. Shen Yue, on the other hand, carried her heart quietly. She felt deeply, but revealed carefully. That difference had always balanced them until it didn't. The first rumor reached him through someone else's careless mouth. She's been spending time with someone new. It wasn't said dramatically. There was no intention to hurt him. But the words stayed with him, repeating in his mind long after the conversation ended. Someone new. Dylan laughed it off at first. He told himself that Shen Yue was free to see anyone she wanted. They had never made promises, never defined anything, never crossed that invisible line between possibility and reality. So, why did his chest tighten every time he imagined her smiling at someone else? Why did the thought of another man standing where he once stood feel unbearable? He didn't confront her. Not yet. He convinced himself that jealousy without a title was unreasonable, that caring too much without permission was childish. Instead, he chose silence, hoping it would protect him from disappointment. But silence doesn't heal. It only deepens the wound. When they met again for work, the difference was unmistakable. Shen Yue looked the same, beautiful, composed, radiant. But she carried herself differently now. There was a gentle distance in her posture, a politeness that felt unfamiliar. She spoke kindly, but she no longer lingered in conversation. She smiled, but her smile ended quickly. Dylan tried to joke the way he always had. Tried to recreate the ease they once shared. She laughed softly, but it felt rehearsed, as if she were careful not to encourage too much closeness. That was when he knew something had changed, and he wasn't included in the reason why. Late at night, Dylan replayed moments in his head. Had he waited too long? Had he mistaken comfort for certainty? Had he assumed she would always be there, standing quietly beside him while he figured out his feelings? In this imagined story, Shen Yue had her own battles. She was tired. Tired of expectations. Tired of being watched. Tired of having every smile analyzed and every interaction turned into speculation. She had begun seeing someone quietly, not out of rebellion, not out of betrayal, but out of a desire for something simpler. Someone who didn't represent a past full of what-ifs. Someone who didn't make her question whether affection was real or just convenient. She never planned to hurt Dylan, but she didn't know how to tell him either. When you care about someone, sometimes honesty feels cruel. Sometimes silence feels safer. Shen Yue chose silence, believing it would protect them both. She didn't realize that silence was exactly what would push him away. Dylan sensed the truth without hearing it directly. He saw it in the way she avoided being alone with him. In the way she checked her phone quickly, then tucked it away as if guarding a secret. In the way her attention drifted elsewhere during moments that once belonged to the two of them. He wasn't cool with it. Not because she owed him anything, but because he had hoped, quietly and foolishly, that they were moving toward something together. One evening, after a long day, Dylan stood alone, staring at his phone. He considered sending a message. A simple question. Is there someone else? But he never sent it. Pride stopped him. Fear stopped him. The possibility of confirmation felt heavier than uncertainty. Shen Yue, on the other side of the silence, stared at her own phone that same night. She typed his name, erased it, typed again, and erased it once more. What could she say? I didn't wait for you. I chose someone else. I was afraid you'd never choose me. Some truths are too sharp to say aloud. And so, both of them stayed quiet, each believing the other had already moved on. The fans noticed the change before either of them admitted it to themselves. Interactions became rare. Interviews felt distant. The warmth that once drew people in had cooled into professionalism. Online, questions multiplied. What happened to them? Why do they seem awkward now? Did something go wrong? No one had answers, because the truth lived in the spaces between them, unspoken, unresolved, and slowly breaking them apart. In every K-drama, there is a moment when the misunderstanding begins. A single choice that alters the course of everything that follows. In this story, that moment wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. It was a smile that didn't linger. A message that wasn't sent. A truth that stayed hidden. And from that silence, everything else would unravel. In most love stories, pain announces itself loudly. There's shouting. There are tears. There is a moment when everything spills out at once, leaving nothing hidden. But in this imagined story, pain arrived quietly, sitting between Shen Yue and Wang like an invisible third presence neither of them wanted to acknowledge. They continued to exist in the same world, yet somehow lived in completely different emotional realities. Dylan felt it every time their paths crossed. He noticed how Shen Yue positioned herself just slightly farther away than before. How she spoke to him with warmth but no intimacy. How her tone remained gentle, yet guarded. It was as if she had carefully drawn a line between them, one he was not allowed to cross anymore. What hurt most was not the distance. It was the restraint. She was holding herself back. And Dylan, for the first time, didn't know how to reach her. At night, he found himself replaying old memories. Moments that once felt ordinary now carried weight. A laugh shared off camera. A glance that lingered too long. The comfort of knowing someone understood him, without explanation. He wondered when those moments stopped being enough. He wondered if he had mistaken familiarity for security. The rumor about her seeing another man refused to fade. It followed him like a shadow, growing heavier with every unanswered question. He tried to convince himself that it didn't matter, that people move on, that life doesn't pause just because feelings are unresolved. But logic offered no comfort. Jealousy, when unspoken, transforms into self-doubt. Was he too slow? Too unsure? Too afraid to disrupt what already existed? In this imagined world, Shen Yue wasn't trying to replace Dylan. She wasn't trying to hurt him. She was trying to protect herself. She had waited, longer than she ever admitted. Waited for clarity. Waited for reassurance. Waited for him to choose her, not as a partner on screen, but as someone real. When nothing changed, she made a decision for herself. The other man didn't sweep her away. He didn't promise forever. He simply showed up, consistently and quietly, without expectations tied to cameras or public opinion. And that simplicity felt like relief. Yet relief came with guilt. Every time Shen Yue saw Dylan, guilt tightened around her chest. She knew he sensed the shift. She knew he was hurting. But she also knew that explaining everything would reopen wounds neither of them knew how to heal. So she stayed polite. She stayed kind. She stayed distant. And Dylan mistook her distance for indifference. The tension between them peaked during a moment that could have changed everything. They were alone, rarely so these days, in a quiet space away from the noise of work and people. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Dylan finally spoke, his voice steady but restrained. You've changed. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. Shen Yue froze for just a second too long. So have you, she replied softly. That was it. That was the moment. The moment when honesty stood right in front of them, waiting to be chosen. Dylan wanted to ask her the question that had haunted him for weeks. He wanted to say her name the way he used to, without hesitation or fear. He wanted to tell her that he wasn't okay, that pretending not to care was exhausting. But instead, he nodded. Because admitting how much he cared felt like giving up control. Shen Yue wanted to explain everything right then. She wanted to say that she hadn't meant to push him away, that she was tired of waiting in uncertainty, that she still cared, just differently now. But instead, she smiled faintly, because explaining would mean admitting that she once hoped for more, and that hope had already hurt enough. They stood there, so close and yet impossibly far apart, each waiting for the other to take the final step. Neither did. After that day, something shifted permanently. Dylan pulled back, not out of anger, but self-preservation. He became more reserved, more focused, more distant. He stopped trying to bridge the gap that Shen Yue had created, telling himself that if she wanted space, he would respect it. Shen Yue noticed immediately. The warmth she had grown used to disappeared. Dylan was still polite, still professional, but the lightness between them was gone. The ease they once shared had been replaced by something colder, something final. And that hurt more than she expected. She realized then that distance doesn't only protect, it also erases. Fans continued to speculate. Every small interaction was analyzed, every glance slowed down and replayed. Some believed they were simply busy. Others sensed something deeper. Neither Shen Yue nor Dylan corrected the assumptions. Because how do you explain something that was never defined to begin with? In quiet moments, Dylan wondered if he should have fought harder. If he should have spoken when he had the chance. If pride had cost him something irreplaceable. In quiet moments, Shen Yue wondered if honesty would have saved them. If waiting a little longer might have changed the outcome. If choosing peace over confrontation had been a mistake. But time doesn't move backward. And feelings, once suppressed, don't disappear, they transform. By the end of this chapter, both of them understood the same truth from opposite sides. Whatever they were, whatever they could have been, it was slipping away. Not because of betrayal, not because of scandal, but because neither of them said the words that mattered when they still could. And somewhere in that silence, love, if it had ever been love, quietly learned how to let go. There comes a moment in every love story when holding on hurts more than letting go. In this imagined ending, Dylan Wang reached that moment quietly. Not in the middle of an argument, not after a confession, but during a simple realization that arrived without warning. He was tired. Tired of wondering. Tired of replaying conversations in his head, searching for missed signals. Tired of carrying emotions that had nowhere to land. The distance between him and Shen Yue had settled into something permanent. No longer sharp, no longer confusing, just final. They worked side by side when required, spoke politely when necessary, and avoided each other's eyes when emotions threatened to surface. This version of them functioned well, but it no longer felt alive. Dylan began to understand that sometimes the hardest endings are the ones without closure. The ones where no one is clearly at fault. The ones where love fades not because it wasn't real, but because it wasn't chosen at the right time. He stopped waiting for answers. Instead, he focused on becoming someone who didn't need them. Work became his refuge. He poured himself into growth, discipline, and ambition. Not as an escape, but as a way forward. Slowly, the weight on his chest began to lift, not because the past hurt less, but because he learned how to carry it without breaking. Shen Yue noticed the change. She noticed how Dylan no longer looked at her with questions in his eyes. How he no longer lingered nearby, hoping for conversation. How his presence felt calmer, more distant, more resolved. And that scared her. She had believed that distance would bring peace. That choosing a quieter path would protect her heart. But watching Dylan move on, with grace, not bitterness, made her realize something painful. She had underestimated what silence would cost them both. In quiet moments, Shen Yue reflected on her own choices. She wasn't unhappy. The path she chose made sense. It gave her stability, clarity, and freedom from uncertainty. And yet, there were memories she couldn't erase. Moments when Dylan had waited for her without asking why. Times when he had understood her, without explanation. The comfort of being seen without effort. She realized that what she missed wasn't a relationship. It was a connection that only existed once. There was no regret, only recognition. One evening, long after the tension between them had faded, Shen Yue and Dylan found themselves in the same space again. Not because they had planned it, not because fate was trying to reunite them. Just coincidence. They exchanged greetings. Simple, polite, familiar. For the first time in a long while, there was no awkwardness. No unspoken questions. No unresolved tension. Just two people who had once mattered deeply to each other, now standing on opposite sides of acceptance. Dylan smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Shen Yue smiled back, and felt something settle peacefully in her chest. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't apologize. They didn't explain. Because some chapters don't need to be rewritten to be honored. As they went their separate ways that night, both of them understood the same truth. What they shared was real, but it belonged to a moment in time that had already passed. Love doesn't always end with heartbreak. Sometimes it ends with gratitude. Gratitude for what was felt, for what was learned, for what helped shape who they became. Fans would continue to wonder. Edits would continue to circulate. Chemistry would remain frozen in memory, untouched by reality. And maybe that was okay. Because not every love story is meant to last forever. Some exist only to remind us that timing matters, that courage matters, that silence can be as powerful as confession. In this imagined world, Shen Yue and Dylan Wang didn't fail each other. They simply grew in different directions. And sometimes, that's the most honest ending of all. Don't forget to subscribe for more insider stories, trending moments, and viral breakdowns.